need to be known. I need them to know me.
There's only one guy at Mercury who doesn't hate your new record with every bone in his body.
David Bowie, I presume. Ron Oberman, Mercury Records.
You know, a lot of people are like, they're like, this isn't Bohemian Rhapsody, or this isn't some huge epic, but it's about a very small part of David Bowie's life. Especially in America, like we can look back at him with sort of this like legend lens, where it's like, well, he was always truly amazing and truly popular, but that wasn't necessarily the case. How do you guys sort of feel about the frame of this movie and about looking at it from like, no, there was a time where nobody believed in him in America, at least. Mark, maybe you can take this one because that's sort of your field.
You mean that's my life? No, I think in talking about it more and thinking about it more, that in the context of a big budget, blockbuster biopic that is designed to reframe the music and make billions of dollars, this entire movie would be probably 4 or 5 minutes of screen time. That this era, you're moving through eras. So the fact that we were able to kind of focus in, I think it's really the reason that Johnny and I chose to do this film, because it is a tricky thing to do a movie about someone revered in an almost godlike way, because the judgment's going to be harsh. But this is really the story about an evolution of an artist, about the struggle of an artist's identity, and about the conversations that sort of happen around that with any creative person. And it was a very human story. I think that more than most biopics, what you get here is, at least for this window in this particular time, is a sense of David's humanity and his personal struggle and the sort of insecurity of a sensitive and frightened young artist. Which you just never hear about or see or think about, but obviously it had to be real. It had to have been a true feeling he had.
He was also sort of like, he had this struggling, I don't want to say time bomb, but like there was kind of like this time bomb, like he was wondering if he had something in his brain and something you couldn't know, to sort of like a mental illness capacity. And like, how did you sort of prepare to play that with like empathy and with sympathy for the issue, for what was going on there, Johnny?
We all have relationship to our minds that is uneasy at times. This is something that I'm happy that it's becoming more kind of commonplace point of conversation, that mental health is not something to take for granted. And I know I've had like my own share of panic attacks and things that I felt overwhelmed by, and severe stage fright and all the it's like, the thing is, I can talk about it now because I've realized that it's like completely normal. But I think David had very real stuff in his family history and with his brother Terry that was absolutely terrifying and really upsetting. And I had a couple of friends growing up who developed schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, and I lived through that thing of like being close to them while they kind of fell apart. And it's still like one of the most upsetting things that I've been through. So I had that in my emotional memory of seeing somebody you love fall apart, be a shadow of themselves, and be institutionalized, and the sadness of that, and and to think about it then when there was more of a stigma about it as well, and this kind of hopelessness around it, and the drugs and the treatment being very primitive and all this stuff. So that I was really interested in that for David, and especially somebody who's just like such a god, such a can do anything, can create anything, be anybody, like write this like holy music, and is such a hero to so many people. To see somebody like that be so full of fear and be so vulnerable, I thought was it's kind of a responsible storytelling, because that is in all of us. We all have that capacity, if not to fall apart, to be so afraid of falling apart. And especially at this point where he really thinks, for one reason or another, if he doesn't make it, if his message doesn't land, if he doesn't transcend this kind of mediocrity, he's just gonna kind of crack up. So I thought that was exciting to think about this David that we don't know, and to meet somebody in the story as well in Ron, who is also, there's a jeopardy with him in his situation as well, and I think they, you know, that parallel becomes this wonderful coincidence for both of them, and that tension in the story. So I loved it. I thought it was much more worthwhile to zero in on this tiny moment than to try and be this sprawling jukebox, you know, musical kind of thing, because we have the records for that.
Okay, so I saw this movie Sound of Metal the other day with Riz Ahmed,
Yeah.
which is a very good movie as well. And there's a part of that where it's like finding your identity, like knowing who you are besides just like, I make these great records, but like there's more to me than that or whatever. And there's a part in this movie when he's meeting with a Rolling Stone journalist, and that guy's like, well, tell me about the through line through your work. Tell me like why people want to come see you. And he sort of can't do it. But like, he's also 24 years old, you know? So it's like, he's a young guy and you can't blame him, I guess, for not emerging fully formed. Like, how do you think, I mean, we didn't know David Bowie, but how do you think he sort of like fused all of this together, assuming he did, and like created this whole, like knowing what he was wanting to do, like, and really getting his image like fused? Do you guys have a sense?
Yeah. Like, you know, as opposed to, it seems like as opposed to dealing with, you know, his fears in a way where he could speak about them or kind of integrate them into, you know, his own self, he decided to, you know, manufacture different identities, different personalities, different, you know, vessels to kind of put out his creativity into the world. There was sort of a safety to it, and also like one of the things that wasn't really talked about in the movie much was that single that Ron played for him by, what was that cowboy's name? The
legendary Stardust Cowboy.
The legendary Stardust Cowboy, I think, kind of blew his mind, and I think that, you know, sort of combined with Little Richard and the nature of performative persona, enabled him to sort of creatively avoid himself and create genius. You know.
To shift gears, Mark, you are a legendary interviewer. I'm sure people ask what you'd want to ask David Bowie, but I would love to know what you'd want to ask Angie Bowie.
Oh, I'd like to ask her what she was doing at the Comedy Store when I was there in 1987 with this weird satanic drug addict that used to hang around there. Like I actually interviewed Duncan Jones, not realizing that he doesn't talk to his mother anymore. And I said to her, I said to him, I'm like, I've met her. She used to hang around the Comedy Store when I was a doorman there. And it was the wrongest way to begin an interview with that guy ever.
Oh, no.
But, you know, I don't know. I imagine she's, you know, pretty kooky. I don't know if she's recovered or not. But I would like to know how she saw her role early on. And then kind of, I'd be more interested in what happened to her. Because I think she had a pretty rough go at it. And I think she's got some mental issues. So I'd probably focus on that, knowing me, more than David Bowie questions.
Yeah, it's interesting too to sort of think about her place in that world in the late 60s. You know what I mean? Like how she maybe didn't have as much agency as someone would now. And so you're like tied to that person and all that stuff too.
One of the things I loved about the story is that I think we went into it a bit. I feel like we were able to reappropriate some of Angie's story, and it was amazing to have somebody as powerful as Jenna inhabit her. She totally was kind of deciding what they were doing at that time. Like she was, and Jenna plays her with such humanity. Like you really feel for her. You go, oh fuck, you know, she was at home, you know, 9 months pregnant, and he's off on tour. And I don't know, I as a parent as well, like I feel that for her, you know. So I love that there's some redirection of that energy onto her, and I don't know, I feel very sympathetic to her in the story. And when she kind of is watching him at the end, you know, we know that Angie was helping him with his costume and his clothes, and you know, and kind of motivating him a lot through this period, and trying to kind of pump him up to go back out there and try again. And when he was failing so much, but at that point where he really started to make it, and you can kind of see it in the Pennebaker Ziggy Stardust film, when Angie comes into the room and he's got all his dresses and everything. She's a bit awkward, she's lost her place, and I feel for her, and anyway, it was cool to get to go back and look at her story a bit in our film. And
well,
yeah,
it's sort of interesting that you have these people that surround this guy. He's a guy that's always shifted up the people he surrounds himself with in relation to the different kind of evolutions of his creative personality. And he left a lot of people in the dust. I mean, I think that's the weird thing, is that, he was, ultimately anybody that gets to where he is totally self-serving. And, and that, has repercussions on everybody that are long-standing. I mean, I imagine that, if you talk to Mick Ronson on any given day throughout that guy's entire career, if he were to be honest, I don't know how great he would speak of the man.
I was going to say, I think that was the biggest sadness for me in researching the story, was learning how, he broke up the Spiders because he knew, I think David knew,
was played.
He wasn't, like, the credits weren't duly going to the right people, and rather than just like reapportion all the money and publishing credits and everything, he had to finish the band, and he talked about that at the time, or afterwards anyway. And I was so to learn about Mick Ronson's story was one of the biggest kind of like, oh my god, he was so important.
So good, yeah.
Rock star or somebody impersonating a rock star? What's the difference?